welcome students. Today we are going to learn about a novel which was written in the 19th century by an author named Walter Scott. This novel is not part of one of the more known ones, but it is definitely one of the most interesting one. It's called Ivanhoe. The author is dealing with the English history rather than the Scottish history for which he is famous. I will discuss first the novel as a part of belonging to the historical genre. Now, we all know a novel is a work of fiction which we like to read. As a historical genre, historical novel existed way back in 800 BC when Homer had used the background of the Trojan War to write his famous epic called Iliad. But in the 19th century, we find that Walter Scott is a pioneer in reinventing this particular genre and using it in his work. Historical novel is not history. It is distinct from history in the sense that all the characters or all situations in the historical novel need not be true to history. Some characters, some situations may or may not be a historical one. They ought to be fictional. The work will deal with actual historical personage. Sometimes it will contain fictional characters, mixing them with the historical characters. In Ivanhoe, the example can be given that King Richard is definitely a historical character, because Richard I was definitely a king of England who had gone on the Third Crusade. And on the other hand, a character like Cedric, who is a Saxon lord, is a fictional character. So, in this type of a work, we will find that the author is reconstructing a past. Now, that past has to be real to the reader, because unless the reader is able to find it as a reality, he will not be able to relate to it. So, it is the work of the writer of a historical novel that he reconstructs the historical past into building it with the fictional material, and at the same time he must not forget that this is a historical as well as a literary element in it, so that the reader of the novel does not feel that he is actually reading history. He should be pleased to read it, because the aim of a novel is to give pleasure to the reader. The world where we are transported because the historical novel writer is carrying us to may not be the world in which we are living. In fact, it is better that it is not the world in which we are living, because some of us read historical novels only for the pleasure of knowing about the past. But there should be enough amount of the custom, about the lifestyle, about the daily routine of that past to make it real enough for the reader of the contemporary times. Now, Walter Scott, when he was writing any of his Waverley novels, had very dexterously managed to build this fiction and the historical element together, making it extremely pleasurable. So much so that Walter Scott is possibly the first novelist who was published across the continent. The Saxons, who are original inhabitants of England, and the Normans, who have come in because of the Norman conquest of England in 1066 AD. This is a realistic picture. This is the reality he wants to build, but fortunately for us, Scott uses a very, very beautiful technique. He encapsulated history. He encapsulated history of a couple of hundred of years in that one period where King Richard is the ruler. Because if you take history per se, King Richard was the ruler some hundred of years after the Norman conquest had happened. And at that point in time in Richard's England, there may or may not have been the conflict of Normans and Saxons as it was in close to 1066. What he is planning to do is that he does not want to describe the surface matter. He wants to go into the depth of the whole situation, giving to his readers how the change in the era happens, how one era seeping into the other era is reflective of a change in the social structure. Ivanhoe as a character is definitely fictional, but Ivanhoe as a character also represents the ideal balance between the old and the new. As far as the background of the novel is concerned, we have three sets of background to this novel. The first set on the outset is the crusade. There is Prince John, and Prince John is trying to usurp King Richard of his throne. Now, King Richard actually fought the Third Crusade, and King Richard, when he comes back to his country, he finds that Prince John, his younger brother, is most reluctant to return the throne to him. So, at one part, the background of Ivanhoe is about the crusade returning king, that is King Richard, who has been named as a Black Knight in the novel. At the second level, the crusade actually translates to the conflict of the Anglo-Saxons with the Normans. To understand this, we need to go back further in history, and it is this part which takes us back to 1066. In 1066 AD, England had seen the death of its Anglo-Saxon ruler, King Edward the Confessor. After the death of King Edward the Confessor, it was the deep desire of his cousin, the Duke of Normandy. Normandy is a place in France. William is his name. He wants to inherit the crown of England, making England part of his joint crown of Normandy and England. However, he finds to his disappointment that the Saxons have nominated Saxon rulers from among themselves. And at the point of 1066, when King William lands up from Normandy to attack England, the king in question in England is Harold. There is a battle which is fought in Hastings. In this battle, King Harold and his party are severely defeated. And after this defeat, we find the Normans take over the crown of England. Was William a popular king? Definitely not. He did not make any effort to make himself popular with his newly found subjects. The Saxons were segregated. One, what did he do? He took the lands away from 5,000, 6,000 Saxon rulers. They were not rulers, they were feudal lords, and their land was distributed among 180 of his own close Norman nobles. Obviously, this does not endear the king to his new subjects. Nor did the fact that he imposed all kinds of French customs on British people. The English protested against French language becoming the language of the court, French forest laws becoming the laws in the country, the codes of chivalry of the French court being imposed on them, the continental customs such as curfew, such as trial by combat, were absolutely new to them. They were not used to it, and they were not at all receptive towards it. There is an excellent scene in the novel where we have the Saxon lord Cedric is hosting almost forced to host the Norman lord de Bois and his companion the prior to a dinner. Now, in this particular scene, Cedric, who is a Saxon and speaks only English but is aware of French as a language, refuses to speak French because he thinks it is his threshold that they have come to, therefore they need to speak Saxon, that is English. On the other hand, de Bois and Prior, who are Normans and speak only French, will not make an effort to speak in English, although they are absolutely aware of the language, because they feel that they are court people and the Saxon lord, although he is a host, must compromise and speak their language. In the end, Scott builds a scene where each of the parties speaks their own language, each able to understand the other, but will not take that final leap of understanding one another. Now, apart from these two aspects, one more aspect also needs to be treated as a background of this novel. When one is looking back to the 12th century, there was a lot of feeling against the Jews among the local people. Now, Isaac the Jew and Rebecca are introduced in this particular novel just to show how both Normans and Saxons are united in their dislike for the Jews. The analysis of chapters 1 to 8 is what is going to be encapsulated now. And we are now looking at England, which is gripped by disturbances. The King Richard of England, who is the reigning monarch, he has not only been away in crusade, but crusade is over and he has been imprisoned by the rulers of Austria and he cannot come back home. In his absence, his younger brother, Prince John, who has been left in charge of the country, actually leads the country into turmoil. He has completely sold himself to his noblemen, who are rather villainous characters. No sense of loyalty among them, even for their own king, that is Prince John. And the state of affairs has aggravated the conflict also between the Saxon inhabitants of England and the Norman inhabitants of England. The story opens in a very interesting manner. It is absolutely expository in nature, the chapter 1, 2 and 3. In these chapters, we first character introduced to us is Gurth and Wamba. They are discussing about how Ivanhoe has been disinherited by his father Cedric, how he has gone to fight the crusades with his king Richard. Cedric is a man who is hell-bent on reinstating the Saxon rule in England, and to that extent he would like the Saxon Lord Athelstan get married to Rowena. Now, entire background of the story of the novel is now presented through the discussion of Wamba and the other servant. That is one technique that the author builds. He is moving backward, he is moving forward. So, the entire background is now encapsulated in this particular conversation that they have. Then we have two horsemen entering the scene, Du Bois Guilbert and the Prior. Now, in Prior and Du Bois Guilbert, we have the representatives of the Norman part of the society. Not only that, we also have a commentary from Du Bois is supposed to be a Knight Templar who should be idealistic in his behavior. He has taken the vow of chastity, poverty, but none of them are kept. Similarly, the Prior also is criticized. Cedric is not only the Saxon lord, but Cedric has a very important role to play in this story. Cedric is the father of Ivanhoe, and Ivanhoe, although makes his disappearance for a large part of the story, Cedric remains in the story as a main Saxon representative. To many critics, Cedric's character growth from animosity against the Normans to his final acquiescence to having a Norman king, Richard, accepted as his monarch, is a growth in this particular novel. Chapter 9 to 17 will be analyzed now, and in these chapters we will move from the social context, that is the Norman and Saxon conflict, to a pageantry. We find at this point that the scene celebrates the banquet of Prince John on the day of the tournament, and this tournament in these couple of chapters take the front seat. But at the same time, Scott refuses to sacrifice the social context of the conflict. Therefore, at the end of the tournament, when the disinherited knight has been declared the winner of this joust, he bypasses all the Norman beauties, and who does he select? Rowena, who is a Saxon princess. Rowena comes forward and takes off the helmet from the disinherited knight. The disinherited knight, when he is discovered to be Ivanhoe, he is also discovered to have been very badly wounded in the tournament. Ivanhoe is entrusted in the care of Rebecca. The story once again shifts, and this time the story concentrates on King John's reaction. King John is extremely flustered. Disinherited knight being back in England means that his lord and master, King Richard, is also back in England. If King Richard is back in England, Prince John can no longer hold on to the crown. And when Cedric is asked to speak, Cedric talks about King Richard as the only ideal or worthy Norman he can think of. And it also establishes one step towards Cedric accepting the Norman kingship. Once he is able to name King Richard as the worthy Norman king, he has already moved one step towards accepting the kingship of King Richard. These chapters end at the point where the banquet has ended and Rowena the beauty has attracted unpleasant attention from de Bracy, and de Bracy is planning to kidnap Rowena while the party is going back home towards Cedric's castle. Next we are going to talk about chapters between 18th chapter and 27th chapter, analyzing it as we go. Cedric is unable to forgive Ivanhoe because Ivanhoe has joined King Richard in his crusades. But nevertheless, Cedric is shown in a more humane character in these particular chapters. We learn that Cedric is definitely caring about Ivanhoe. He has nothing against Ivanhoe joining King Richard as one of his followers to fight the War of Crusade. He feels that he needs to support the cause of the Saxon kings in England, and to that extent he extends his hatred for his son. He also, the character of Cedric, as I said, the change of him is also a very important development in this story, and the kidnapping is organized by de Bracy, and the reason that the kidnapping happens is because de Bracy, during the banquet where the Saxons and the Normans did not get along with each other, had spotted the beautiful Rowena, kidnapped the lady. Not only that, the wounded Ivanhoe is no longer with the party. He has, on the other hand, been assigned to the Jews. Why? Because Rebecca the Jewess is supposed to be very, very skilled in the art of healing people. Now, when the attack happens, Wamba encounters a new character, Locksley. Locksley is none but Robin Hood of the English legend of Robin Hood. Locksley takes them to a friar's chapel where the friar and Black Knight are waiting. Black Knight is King Richard, the Lionheart. Black Knight promises Wamba that he is going to do everything to defeat de Bracy's men and rescue the Saxons. De Bracy's men, on the other hand, take prisoners and they take it away to Turkilstone. It's a castle which formerly belonged to a Saxon lord, and now Isaac, who has been identified as a Jew, is thrown into a prison. He is told that unless he pays a certain ransom, he will not be allowed to go, and his daughter is also going to be tortured. Now, this is one commentary on the Jews in the society. Most of the Jews in 12th century were wealthy merchants. So, therefore, it was a very common practice among the people of 12th century England to somehow or the other put the Jews in a situation where they had to pay ransom. Certain characters like de Bracy is suddenly shown in a more favorable light. It happens this way that Rowena cries, she is weeping profusely, and de Bracy feels implored enough. Now, he feels moved by Rowena's tears and he decides to let Rowena go. And it exposes a side of de Bracy which is chivalric, which responds to a woman's tears. Next, in the prison, we come to the story of Rebecca. Rebecca is being held by Du Bois. Du Bois wants to outrage her modesty. Rebecca stands her ground and refuses to yield to the passion of Du Bois. The result is that Du Bois converts his evil intentions into a very, very beautiful, passionate love, which is true love for this lady. We will now analyze chapters 28 to 36. In this section, after an 11-chapter absence, Ivanhoe makes one more appearance, and the focus will shift to Ivanhoe as Rebecca. They are together, and an interesting development is shown in this stage where we find that Rebecca is falling in love with Ivanhoe. Outside the castle, on the other hand, there is a fight, and in that fight, King Richard naturally is able to overpower de Bracy. He has charged into the burning castle where the Ivanhoe is lying because he cannot move, and in the smoke and the fire the Black Knight manages to rescue Ivanhoe, but Ulrica the maid dies in that fire. The Saxons have now liberated everybody, and next movement they go to the forest, and in the forest where they meet, that is the Locksley Hall, and located inside the forest they meet the character of Robin Hood. Now in the forest scene shifts to Friar, who arrives, and he arrives accompanied by the Jew, Isaac the Jew, who now learns for the first time that his daughter Rebecca has been kidnapped by Du Bois, and he is desperate to attain the freedom from these Normans of his beautiful daughter. We have Isaac traveling to the temple store, and he tries to, in an attempt to rescue his daughter. The head of the Templars, Beaumanoir, is angry with him, so he has to prove, Knight Templars, he has to prove that he has not actually broken the Knight Templars vow, and and there is a hint that Du Bois has been bewitched by the Jewess. There are too many things happening in these chapters, and then again we have Rebecca being declared a witch and burning her on the stake. Finally, we have come to the chapter 37 to 44, where the beginning happens, the trial of Rebecca for witchcraft, as I have already told you, and the anti-Semitic feelings are projected in a very severe manner. The way Rebecca is charged with witchcraft is extremely prejudiced. She is about to be burnt at stake, and Boyce Gilbert, who has fallen deeply in love with Rebecca, is trying to rebuff this effort to put her to stake and killing her off, and he proposes a trial by combat. He asks Rebecca to ask for this favor of a French law, trial by combat, to be used to save her life. Unfortunately, he makes a misjudgment. He believes that no champion will step forward to defend this Jewess. But it so happens that Ivanhoe, on request of Rebecca's father, Isaac, has now come over to fight in Rebecca's defense. Interestingly, when he fights the battle, there is an equal fight between Boyce de Gilbert and Ivanhoe. But Boyce de Gilbert dies in that battle. He dies torn by inner conflict. The passions that are raging inside him against and for the fact that he wants to be with Rebecca is supposed to have killed him. Now, Scott uses his historical judgment to pass a commentary on the monarchy at this point in time. Now, we have Richard, who is not revealing himself to the nation until he has raised a formidable force of army and is able to in every capacity defeat Prince John and take over his role as a king of England. Athelstane, who had been so far declared dead, is actually found not dead at all. He had just fainted and in a comatose stage had been considered dead for so long. Now he urges Cedric that Cedric should permit a marriage between Ivanhoe and Rowena. Not finding an acceptance in the English society, Rebecca will walk away from England itself with her father. They will look for more hospitable situation in Granada, and they are moving away. And in the final scene after the wedding, Rebecca visits Rowena, and it is a beautiful scene which he constructs with a lot of care. And in this particular scene where Rebecca and Rowena meets, I think Scott's sympathies also lie with Rebecca. Therefore, between the two characters who are supposed to be equally important in the course of the story, Scott definitely sides with Rebecca, and she is shown as a much more gracious, much more giving and forgiving kind of a lady. But King Richard has not survived for too long. He is killed in a battle near Limgoes, and after which he everything that Richard had undertaken in his lifetime goes away. Now that actually takes and wraps up the main story of summary of Ivanhoe. Now thank you very much for being here to listen to the lesson.